It is 8:35, and we are still waiting for other members of the committee to arrive. We'll give it a few more minutes before we begin, but I'd like to urge Council Members Zine and Han to join us here in room 1050, and we'll be ready to begin momentarily. It is 8:40, and we are going to commence the meeting of the Education and Neighborhoods Committee. I'm Paul Krikorian, the new chair of the committee. We're still waiting for members Zine and Han, but we're going to go ahead and begin. It's Wednesday morning, January 20th, and I want to welcome all of you to my first meeting. I'm very much looking forward to working with city staff and all of you on an ongoing basis in this committee. These are issues that are certainly near and dear to my heart as a former member of a school board. The work that we're going to be doing in building a stronger partnership between this city and our public schools is going to be very, very important to me. And as someone who, even before arriving here in the council, had a very long and positive relationship with the neighborhood councils in my state legislative district, I very much understand how important it is that we continue the move towards empowerment of communities and neighborhoods, particularly as the city faces the great crises that it's currently facing. We need all hands on deck, and it's going to be very important to continue to encourage the continuing empowerment of neighborhoods, and I'm looking forward to doing that in this committee. With that, let's begin with the roll call, and then we'll go ahead with item one.
Okay, right now, this is the Education Neighborhood Committee, and present is Council Member Paul Krikorian. We're still waiting for a couple more members. We'll proceed with item number one.
Let's proceed.
Item number one is the City Clerk and Department of Neighborhood Empowerment reports relative to the 2010 Neighborhood Council elections and additional recommendations.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Krikorian.
Good morning.
June Lagnay, City Clerk, and with me are Arlene Taylor, Division Chief for Elections, and Isaias Cantu of our Neighborhood Council Election Division, Election Section. What you have before you is our November 16th, 2009 report, which presents an informational update of the City Clerk's activities in administering the upcoming 2010 Neighborhood Council elections and some technical recommendations that are being put forward to you for your approval. As a matter of background, in 2010, the Clerk will administer 89 Neighborhood Council Board elections. Our challenge is striking a proper balance between accommodating each of those 89 neighborhood councils districts' unique features while conducting the overall election process in a standardized fashion as we would a regular municipal election. The 89 neighborhood councils will be divided into 9 regions, so there will be 9 separate election dates. But there will still be 89 polling locations, which will be staffed, supplied, open, and available throughout those 9 regions affected. It is estimated that as many as 1,500 or more board seats may be up for election. It is possible the clerk could process more than 6,500 potential candidates for all 9 election regions. We also anticipate having over 400 distinct ballot types versus anywhere from 55 to 58 ballot types in a typical municipal election. The elections will be conducted between the months of March and June 2010. We have already entered election mode for 4 regions. They are in candidate filing mode. Our first phase, which was developing the rules and regulations for the various neighborhood council elections, lasted most of last year, 2009, and we're finishing that now. We are now in the active election mode. As I said, 4 of our 9 regions are already in candidate filing phase, so the game has begun. A little bit more detail. The report before you goes over how we developed our neighborhood council election rules and regulations. We, the city clerk, developed one single coherent and consistent set of procedures that all neighborhood councils can refer to. These election procedures are based on 4 sub-assets: the neighborhood council's own bylaws, the 2010 Neighborhood Council Election Procedures Stipulation Language Worksheet, which you will hear referred to as the STIP doc, the 2010 default citywide election values, and the 2010 neighborhood council election policies. In 2009, we did quite a number of activities, and what I would like to do is to pass to you and Mr. Zine, Easy, can you pass this? The list of activities, the key dates that we pursued in the year 2009. We expanded the number of neighborhood council election regions from 7 to 9, which allows for a more manageable distribution of neighborhood council elections per region. In May, we conducted the Regional Election Week and the Random Ballot Placement Lottery to determine the order of the NC elections and the order in which candidates will be listed. In June, we conducted the Regional Election Day of the Week selection meeting, at which the neighborhood councils voted on which date of the week their election would be held. We also hosted a series of regional informational meetings to provide neighborhood council board members and stakeholders with the same information that is covered in the report that you have before you. 4 recurring concerns emerged from the neighborhood councils: the lack of comprehensive vote by mail, the limit of 1 polling site per neighborhood council and a 6-hour time frame in which to vote, and poll workers not being allowed to work in their own neighborhood council. On the lack of comprehensive vote by mail, this was due to the $450,000 election component, which was removed from our budget due to the city's financial situation back in June. The clerk has always maintained that comprehensive vote by mail was and is a desirable asset, but we were specifically defunded that amount from the beginning. Some neighborhood councils have offered to pay to have comprehensive vote by mail in their own individual neighborhood councils. However, this is a piecemeal approach and creates a dangerous voting disparity among the NCs. If one NC has money to pay for additional vote by mail and another one does not, the access, as you can plainly see, has become disparate. On poll workers,
let me
yes,
interrupt
sir.
you right there, because I'm not sure why that would be a concern, because the issue would be fairness within the particular neighborhood council as opposed to level of participation, comparing one neighborhood council to the other. So why would that be a policy concern, number one? Number two, have you explored alternative methods by which we can provide access to voting by mail or alternative voting systems that will have little or no cost, such as internet voting, telephone voting, access to mail-in ballots that could be downloaded from the internet, and that sort of thing? If you could address those.
Those are
things.
great
By the way, before you do, I do want to acknowledge and welcome Councilmember Zine, who's with us. Please proceed.
Yes, thank you. Those are excellent suggestions, and we are soliciting suggestions exactly like that from all quarters, from stakeholders to electeds to city officials. The main problem, besides disparity, and I will have Arlene articulate on that a little bit more, is timing, is that we spent most of 2009 developing all these standards and all these procedures, and the reason why it took that long of a period is because you have to get buy-in from the neighborhood councils. In order for us to have vote by mail, an additional paid vote by mail option for neighborhood councils to vote into, that procedure should have been put into place long before this. As I said, 4 of our regions are already in play. To essentially change the rules while the game is already in progress is a little bit problematic. Arlene, could you also address the other reasons that we've gone over about why option for additional vote by mail would be problematic at this time?
From the staff perspective, as June mentioned, it's problematic because we're already in the process of beginning candidate filing. Actually, it's already ended for 2 of the 9 regions, and vote by mail would immediately follow that period. So we have the candidates filing, then we start accepting the vote by mail applications from each of those regions. And the reason for that is, of course, because we have to develop the ballots, which then will get mailed out to those who have requested and qualify their stakeholder status for each of the regions, or each of the NCs within the regions. So it is problematic in our view, only because as elections professionals, our goal is always to make it equitable across the board, not just within, say, a council district, or in this case, an NC, but for all people who may be involved in the voting process. We try to make sure that, everyone has the opportunity to have the same experiences. So we did feel that it was an equity issue even between the NCs, not within.
And I understand that and appreciate that that's the universe that you usually operate in, but neighborhood councils are a unique animal. And so what we're striving for is to kind of strike that balance between equity, fairness, propriety on the one hand, and on the other hand, the greatest degree of flexibility and independence among the neighborhood councils to decide their own. So I certainly see that there's a little bit of a tension between those two goals that we're trying to strike the balance in.
Right, especially in terms of the way the election's conducted, because going into this process, each of the neighborhood councils, for the most part, were allowed to determine, their structure, how their elections would be conducted, and there was a slow movement toward standardization. But it was still very flexible in terms of how they can conduct their elections, when, and so forth. We were given the responsibility of doing the elections for a number of different reasons, but one of them was trying to move even more toward further standardization. There were certain limits that we imposed in terms of how far we would go in that direction, which was we were going to honor their the structures. There were a number of others that are in prior reports that are available. But I think going into this process, we really worked toward speaking with the neighborhood councils and getting their input in the process. And unfortunately, because of where we are in the process, we don't really feel we can make changes now. What we would recommend is that we get through this first election cycle, because we are under the gun and we're barely meeting the deadlines we have set now in terms of having the documents ready for each of the regions as the candidate filing opens. So we're really pushing just to meet the planned timeline, and we don't feel that we're really capable of changing, any of the components at this time without jeopardizing the whole thing.
Madam Clerk, I apologize. I took you off stride a little bit by interrupting, so feel free to go ahead and continue with your report.
Let me address your other question, too. There have been neighborhood councils that have not only offered to pay for additional vote by mail, but have indicated an interest to participate, as you say, in a pilot all-electronic voting procedure. We have a great hope that this is something that can be done on a comprehensive basis in the future. Again, the timing is not good. We are set up right now on a precinct model. There are some concerns. One is, in order for a neighborhood council to run a trial all-electronic pilot, they would have to select a vendor. And the city contract system is very strict and laid out as far as vendors have to be selected according to competitive bid, and it has to be an open and transparent process, and it usually takes some time. We are so deep in the election process now that I don't really think that it's practical. Besides the fact that it would take an enormous amount of education to let the stakeholders in a neighborhood council understand that if they participate in the pilot, it is not necessarily the real vote. There could be confusion that which is the real vote when I go to the poll, or if I do this electronic thing, which again may be moot because of the inability to have contracted with the vendor because of the city contracting rules. But vote by mail and a comprehensive vote by mail, and if we can get the funding for it, and an electronic model are excellent things that we really want to work closely with the neighborhood councils in the next election cycle to incorporate, if at all possible. Another concern, going back to my original presentation, that was put forward by the neighborhood councils was their concern that they were not being allowed to work in their own region, in their own neighborhood council. And I do want to elaborate a little bit that the reason why the clerk put this stipulation in place is because we wanted the voting experience to be as fair and transparent as possible. It was for this precise reason that the program originally required that neighborhood council volunteers participate in polling places outside their own region. We did, however, receive many concerns on this point, and after great reconsideration and research with the city attorney, our current policy no longer restricts neighborhood council volunteer poll workers from working within their own geographic region. They will be asked which region they would like to work in, and the clerk will make every effort to accommodate their request. However, as a proviso, as election administrators, we must take into consideration poll precinct staffing requirements of the neighborhood council citywide, balancing workload, as some precincts will be undermanned and some will be over, so we need to have the ability to place people where the need is the greatest. The reason why, the question has been asked of me, we allow people to work in their own precincts in municipal elections. Why not for neighborhood council elections? And the reason why is neighborhood council elections, by their very nature, are essentially different. In regular municipal elections, candidates normally do not have direct personal ties to potential poll workers within their own precincts. However, in neighborhood councils, there are deep connections that among communities and shared histories that unite families, neighbors, business associates, and others. We respect these bonds and value the wealth they represent, but it is precisely these ties that we cannot have total knowledge of and do not pretend to and do not have the capacity to understand all the different ties within a neighborhood council that could be misinterpreted as poll worker bias on election day. And as election officials, we must neutrally consider this issue seriously, because putting on an election is expensive, but what's even more expensive is to do it again. So if an election is challenged and successfully thrown out, we have to redo that election. And there are litigation potentials as well. That is why we came up with the compromise of you may work your own region, but not your own neighborhood council. I just thought I would fill you in that is a little background of where we were on that. So summarizing what we've done up to now, what is before you are 2 ministerial recommendations. In order for us to proceed with what's going to come out of our elections starting in March, we need to have in place a neighborhood council election recount fee, and we need your permission to proceed with developing a neighborhood council election challenge process. So what we are asking of you today is if you would agree to instruct the city attorney to prepare the ordinance that would put these things forward. That ordinance would then be returned to the council for a full vote.
Councilmember Zine, do you have any questions?
I will be very candid. Being a charter commissioner, helping establish, along with my colleague Janice Hahn, neighborhood councils, we never envisioned them to be this complicated, this costly, this cumbersome. We thought they would be simple. They would be community coming together, like our community groups that are currently in operation. Sherman Oaks Homeowners Association, Woodland Hills Homeowners Association work extremely well, not cumbersome, not draining the tax dollars that we don't have. I think that it's gotten so complicated where you're looking at making this a very sophisticated process. It's not designed to be that way. It was designed to be simple, people coming together in a community to discover their neighbors, help establish in that community what they need from the city council representative, from the mayor's office, but equality and fairness, but the problematic, cumbersome, not supposed to be complicated. I mean, I'm just amazed at how much we're spending to do this process, and now you're looking for money to have the challenge. If someone's going to challenge an election, the founders of the Constitution had a vision. The charter commissioners had a vision, and this is far from the vision that we had. I'm not talking about someone who told me this. I was there at the table for 2 years as an elected charter reform commissioner. We never envisioned neighborhood councils being this complicated, being this costly, and it really is. I mean, what you're talking about to me is setting up a very sophisticated system, very expensive system, which we don't have the funds. If you're looking for more money, it's not there. And I don't know how we bring it back to what the charter brought about with neighborhood councils and the participation of neighbors who like each other, who want to help the community, not who are arch enemies who want to destroy the community. It just amazes me where we're going with this. So my concern is that the dollars aren't there. If you read today's editorial in the LA Times, it reflects on what we as council and the mayor need to do with the city, with the budget, and it just doesn't fall in line with what the vision was of the charter and where we're at. So with all due respect, when we do municipal elections, that's one issue. When we're doing neighborhood councils, it's a whole different focus. And it was never envisioned to be what it's become, a very complicated, costly process for the taxpayers of the city of Los Angeles. And when you go to the neighborhood council meetings, and I've attended many of them, it's the group of people who are concerned, who are committed. And we look at the return of voters. When we send out the ballots to vote, it's about 16% in our municipal elections. I don't know what it is for the neighborhood council elections, probably less than that. And we're spending millions of dollars. So what are we trying to accomplish when we want to have these people in the community come together? And I'm frustrated to see it's gone down this path that's costly, that is really not what we envisioned when we brought neighborhood councils into line within the city of Los Angeles. That's the concern. It's not something I read in a book. I spent 2 years at the table as the vice chair of the Charter Reform Commission, the elected Charter Reform Commission. So I'm just astounded that we're talking about this expensive operation, this sophisticated operation, as we would do a municipal election, for people who are established in that particular aspect of government to serve the people. It's not what the vision was for neighborhood councils. So I think we're far off the mark where we wanted to go. And as far as funding, I can tell you candidly, you're not going to find additional funding because it's not there to run this operation. And whether it goes electronic or some other way, that's fine. But can you tell me what the return is, the participation in neighborhood councils? How many people actually vote?
From the 2008 cycle?
Well,
Just a
I
general
mean,
percentage.
there's a huge variation between neighborhood councils in terms of involvement, well, participation in the neighborhood councils themselves, and the number of people or stakeholders who choose to vote.
Right.
It could be over, several thousand versus 12. I mean,
12
varies.
that's what I'm saying. So we're spending millions of dollars on what?
Right. Though, in this report, we aren't asking for any additional funding.
Well, I did hear funding. I did hear.
What we've asked for is.
Well, I said
the
it's setting up a
institution of-
recount fee schedule, which is incumbent upon the person who
Yeah.
requests the recount. That cost is borne by that person.
So what happened, what our experience was in 2008 is after we conducted, the canvass and we had the official results out, we had a few requests for recounts, which, considering the fact that the person never even came back to view the recount or even followed up to find out what the results were, we felt may have been frivolous. So our feeling was if we impose a recount fee, as we have with municipal elections, only those who are serious about it will move forward with a recount request, and if the results change and the ultimate outcome differs, then we pay for it.
But you're talking about people who are doing something out of the goodness of their heart for their community that aren't getting compensated at all.
Sure.
So they're going to take money out of their pocket and do a recount. I mean, I just,
The option will be open to them. It is not a mandatory fee.
well, I think we're way off the mark of what we originally planned, to be honest with you. So, I mean, I like to work within the system, but it seems like the system has gone on a track that is not what the charter brought about with the commissions, the neighborhood councils. It's not what the reality of the situation. It's gotten off way far off the mark. It's going to cost like $2 million for the elections.
1.9 for 89 neighborhood council elections.
That's a tremendous amount of money. $1.9 million, plus the money that they receive for activities in the community. And there's been some questions and some investigations, and some people gotten in trouble with that. Again, it was designed to bring people in the community together to help the community. None of this official process with all the particulars that have seemed to branch out from the original vision of neighborhood councils. So,
Councilman, if I might wax philosophic for a moment. First of all, we totally support the work of the neighborhood councils, and we do not wish to interfere in what their true purpose is, which is to advocate for their neighborhoods. We are simply talking about the one issue of running their board elections as instructed to us by the council. The council gave us the authority and gave us the responsibility of doing so. So we are simply discharging our responsibility as given to us by the council. And I would also add that I do understand that all the paperwork can be very frustrating and confusing, but in order to run an election that is equal, it takes a lot of complicated paperwork to do that. Equality is not easy, it's not simple. Think about all the different codes that are written here in the city for in our ad code and so forth, and our muni code, just so that people can be treated equally. And if our charge is as election officials to run this so that we have our imprimatur on it and that we can say we ran a fair election, we have to have certain principles in place. That's where the complication comes in.
Well, let me just say this in conclusion from my side. I remember cookie cutter, and we mentioned that many times during the Charter Commission. It's not supposed to be cookie cutter. It was supposed to be independent, which each neighborhood council, how they wish to run their operations. And the word cookie cutter was mentioned many times during our meetings, that we didn't want neighborhood councils to fall into a cookie cutter environment, that each one, as you mentioned, they're all different. We've got...
And each one will have its own unique ballot system. As Arlene may, I don't know if you brought it with you today, the colored paper.
Oh, from 2008.
If you did, I'd like you to.
Yeah. So, what we found as we've jumped into these neighborhood council elections is that each one is, of course, individual and very different in terms of how they address the needs in their community. So you may go from a neighborhood council that allows everyone to vote for every seat, and they may have, you know, the basic president, secretary, treasurer type positions, versus another neighborhood council who decides they need to have one set of residential districts, a different set of business districts, individual offices that, or officers that will address specific concerns within their community. So you go from someone who may vote just one ballot to someone, this is from 2008, and we won't be using this format this time, to someone where there are, you know, 20 to 30 different races that people may or may not be eligible to vote on, dependent on how the neighborhood council has defined, you know, the stakeholders. And so then we had to determine, okay, so you're a resident in this area, you work in this area, you are involved in this activity, you can vote on, you know, these 3 of these 30 offices. So that's where the complexity came in for us in terms of the election. And I think that's what's maintaining the individuality of the neighborhood councils. It's because they define the structure and how they're going to address their needs within their neighborhood.
So you could have 90 different ballots.
We're having over 400 types.
Over 400. Okay.
And then people may get 1, they may get 5 within the same neighborhood council. It just depends how they're set up.
We conform to what the neighborhood council.
Too complicated.
It's
from what it
complicated.
was envisioned.
It's
Way
complicated.
too complicated from what it was.
And I think that's why there was a request to move toward a little more standardization where possible, without touching, you know, the heart of the neighborhood councils.
That's all I have.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Further on the subject of budgetary constraints, what is the current plan for outreach to potential stakeholders to let them know about the election, to let them know about their ability to participate in the election, where they go to vote, that sort of thing? What's the budget for that, and what are the alternatives that we may have to provide that kind of outreach, since there isn't a significant budget for it?
The city clerk originally approached the council last year with, I think it was about $1 million for 2 mass mailings. $2 million for 2 mass mailings, and we were going to do a very thorough, aggressive outreach, all levels, TV, newspapers, et cetera, in order to meet the city's fiscal crisis. That money we were asked to cut our budget down, so that money went out the door. The EN committee and the full council at the time then charged outreach responsibility totally to Dunn. And if you want Mr. Kim to come up and tell you what their Don is doing about outreach, I'm more than happy to give the mic.
I'll do that in a moment. Anything else to add on outreach before we do that?
We do not have $1 for outreach, I'm sorry.
Okay. Now, as I understand it, last night a new neighborhood council was certified, and there may be additional certifications that come down the pike over coming weeks or months. Can you talk a little bit about how that neighborhood council, the Westwood Neighborhood Council, fits into the election schedule now, and what alternatives there may be for either that neighborhood council or others who are certified now late in the process for conducting an election that will allow a board to be seated without having to go 2 years without an elected board?
We are cognizant that new neighborhood councils, it's an ongoing process. They will be certified, decertified along the way. In order for us, however, to manage to handle 89 neighborhood councils all at once, we had to put a cutoff date of June that you had to reach your certification. Whoever is certified after that date, we will catch up to in the 2012 elections. However, specifically for Westwood, their bylaws contains a clause that sets up a procedure for an interim board that will keep the newly certified neighborhood council in place until they can come under the clerk's administration of elections in 2012.
Okay.
Arlene, anything else?
Anything further, Mr. Zahn? Okay. Thank you very much. I see Mr. Kim's here. I'd like to ask him to come up and offer the perspectives of Dunn. We do have a November 20th, 2009 letter with some of the comments, but Mr. Kim, welcome. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Councilman. I'll give you an overview of the outreach role that the department has been charged with. I'll give a brief overview and then introduce Leila Campos and Tanita Larios, who are working more directly on the ground. But basically, our role was to work as closely with neighborhood councils to provide them with resources, to provide outreach and in their neighborhoods. And where possible, we've been trying to coordinate with the city clerk. But as you heard from the city clerk, their charge is mainly to administer the election. So whenever there are election-related questions, we are directing them to the city clerk's website. There's a lot of logistical issues that require coordination, and that's been one of the challenges of this new way of conducting elections. So we're also planning to do some media outreach as well. We've published a new brochure, which would have brought copies, but Empower LA is our new branding. And we're distributing as many brochures to organizations with as many constituencies as possible. I'm reaching out to labor unions, to city employees, to schools, to encourage as many people to get involved in the upcoming elections as possible. So turn it over to Leila Campos to give you some more information.
Good morning, respectable members of the Education and Neighborhoods Committee. Leila Campos, Director of Field Operations with the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. And as General Manager Ban Wan Kim said, we're definitely charged with the voter mobilization per the NCRC 912 Review Commission recommendations. So what we have envisioned for the neighborhood council system in terms of outreach, specifically for the 2010 elections, is a set of 4 goals. We want to train neighborhood councils to recruit their own candidates. We want to recruit voters for the entire system. We want to increase the awareness of the neighborhood council system via the outreach campaign that we're launching. And we want to target specific populations that are scarcely represented within the city of Los Angeles and the system, such as youth and areas of low civic participation. Monolingual communities would also go in that category. So again, our purpose is to increase the visibility and taking the opportunity of the 2010 elections to bring people to the table who are not currently at the table. So in terms of the outreach strategies that we have implemented so far, and also my colleague Tanita Larios can get into a little bit more of the detail, we have released consistent press releases and have been working with media to get the word out. We've are working on advertising the elections on the DOT buses with the bus cards that are fairly visible in those buses. So creating a tagline and a catchy phrase for neighborhood for the community to know that neighborhood council elections are approaching. We're circulating flyers. We are doing a massive mail and phone campaign to community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, educational institutions, and as my general manager said, organizations that have a following like unions and so forth. One of the major things that we're doing, because as having worked with the neighborhood council system for some time, we understand about grassroots and the uniqueness of each neighborhood. So one of the things that we are placing great emphasis on is on our learning sessions that we are conducting, and that is a face-to-face with our that our staff are doing with new members of the community, to inform them about the neighborhood council system, the benefits about getting involved with their neighborhood council, and how they can participate. At the same time, we want to be able to train these newcomers so that they know pretty much what they're getting themselves into as they come into the new system. To date, we have conducted 7 learning sessions that have yielded 140 participants total. We started this back in November of last year, but due to the holidays, those 2 months were a little bit slow, November and December, but we have reached out to 140 individuals, and 102 of those were newcomers to the system. We are committed to conducting 30 learning sessions, and that is that face-to-face where we are trying to target large crowds and get them involved in the system. So, Tanita, if you want to add anything else too.
Sure. Hi, good morning. My name is Tanita Larios, and I am currently the acting senior project coordinator for the Valley. Just to give you a little background, we started this process in September. Early September, we held a outreach meeting with all of the neighborhood councils citywide in conjunction with the regions that the city clerk had identified for elections. During that meeting, we provided a couple of tools and an opportunity for neighborhood council members from each of the 89 neighborhood councils to collaborate. In the resource guide, we gave them demographic information. We provided an outreach strategy, a messaging strategies, and some tools in order for them to get their outreach plan off and running. We also provided them with a timeline, and we provided them with a resource guide in regards to cost factors for printing, advertising, and things of that nature. At the beginning of the meeting, we kind of went over the resource guide, and towards the end, we allowed each region to get together and collaborate, of which 2 collaboratives that we know of currently, I believe it's Region A and Region C, have been working together. The neighborhood councils, I believe it's between 10 to 12 each region, with the elections region and city clerk, have banded together to do a compiled outreach strategy, of which our staff members have been attending and encouraging and helping them get things together. They have sent out some postcards, they have posted things in news media, and so that has been up and coming. We had also a follow-up meeting from our September meeting at our October Congress, of which we dealt with messaging strategy. We had Wendy Moore, who works with some of the neighborhood councils currently to get articles out into print media, and also help with messaging in regards to print flyers, in regards to how you display information on a flyer appropriately. So we had several sessions on that, and they were able to come together. So we're continuing to work with them along the process. We've also been partnering with the neighborhood councils to help us do, we kind of divided our strategy into a micro, macro. our department is doing the macro. So we're going out and we're getting the large organizations tied in, and the neighborhood councils are coming underneath and providing the macro. So they're doing the door to door. They're hitting these the neighborhoods where we can't physically we don't have the resources to go out and do the door to door knocking that they can do to the neighborhood watches or these small groups. But they're helping us get people to our learning communities, our learning sessions, and our next one will be held on January the 28th at Sherman Oaks Elementary School. And I received a phone call from someone, one of the board members from Midtown North Hollywood, who is also helping us encourage new stakeholders or people who have just joined the process to get a little more information on what neighborhood councils are and how they fit into the picture, to that she has alerted media, and some may be coming out. We are also partnering with the census. We have heard of a big march that will be taking place during the 23rd in Van Nuys in regards, I believe it's an immigrant march from the Office of Councilman Cardenas has alerted us about that. And so we are looking for those opportunities on large scales to go out and have massive impact. And as we receive that information, we pass it on to the census, and vice versa. They pass on any leads that we have. So this is how we are using our resources to, most effectively. We're going after the large, and we're partnering with the neighborhood councils to help us with that micro outreach.
So it sounds as though the department is focusing on trying to leverage limited resources with regional outreach.
Yes,
exactly.
And citywide outreach to give a general awareness that neighborhood council elections are happening now. But it's really being left to the neighborhood councils themselves to let people know on X date at X location you can come and vote for X neighborhood council.
That's correct.
Okay. And there's no budget supplementation, I assume, to provide neighborhood councils the opportunity to do that. I think it's a safe assumption.
We're neighborhood councils, and $15,000 of our budget is being paid for some of the ads that we're going to take out in DOT buses and small ads in the community newspapers.
Okay. Okay. Aside from outreach, any further comments on the clerk's report before we move to public comment?
Thank you for bringing up Westwood. We stayed up till midnight last night to finish that certification hearing, and the commission did approve certification. There were two approaches that the commission strongly recommended and the forming group agreed to. First was to request that the city clerk conduct the elections, because as you know, it was a highly contentious certification. There were several homeowner groups that were adamantly opposed to the formation of a neighborhood council. And there were the forming committee of 20 people who did extensive outreach and said that there were a strong call for a neighborhood council formation. So the commission, as part of their certification, the first one was to have the city clerk conduct the elections as the most transparent way to seat the board. Secondly, if the city clerk were to look at contracting with a vendor, if it was a resource question, and I would certainly be willing to partner with the city clerk to figure out a way to do that. If there is no way for the elections to be conducted under the auspices of the city clerk, then the third option would be a selection process composed of 2 people from the forming group, 2 people from the homeowners associations, and 1 person to be selected from the department. So those 5 people would be charged with selecting the first 11 of 19 board seats, and then once the 11 are basically selected, then the 11 would select the rest of the 19.
Mr. Zine earlier raised the important point about complexity in this election, and how that does create a tension with what neighborhood councils were intended to be. And as I understood what the clerk indicated, that there was direction provided by the council to go in the direction of creating a city clerk managed election, and that's how we got to this point. now that we are at this point and we are facing elections coming up in 89 councils throughout the city, what would be the options that we would have to try to address some of the concerns that Councilmember Zine has expressed and that I think others share about excessive complexity at this stage in the process?
Well, we are fairly deep into the process, and every day we all learn about the extent of the budget crisis, and you know, Councilman Zine brings up a good point in terms of the cost of the elections. When we were administering elections, we did it at a very grassroots level. You lose the benefit of having professional election administrators and some degree of standardization. That was the decision that the City Council made at a time when perhaps the resources weren't quite as tight. The Council really does need to make a decision about the future of what a neighborhood council election should be about. Should it look more like a city-run election, or should it look more like a community-run election? I think there's two fundamental different ways to run an election, and I'm open to discussing at any point after perhaps a midpoint where we see what the strengths and weaknesses are of having a city clerk run election, and see what the alternatives are so that we could have that dialogue with the elected officials and neighborhood councils about the future of the neighborhood council election system.
And we'll need to compare how turnout is the old way versus the $1.9 million way.
That would be an interesting data point, yeah.
And if there's not much difference, that's a lot of money for not a huge increase in participation, even with the outreach. Because neighborhood council has been around for a number of years. It's not new. So
yes,
when I look at how it was run and how we're making it more sophisticated, that cost factor, if we don't generate a tremendous amount of support and more participation, what are we spending our money on?
it's all about turnout.
That's exactly it. It's about turnout with the neighborhoods. And obviously Westwood, they had a turnout because they had two opposing forces. So that's Sunland, Tahunga, you've got a community that's very involved. Woodland Hills, community involved. The bottom line is you've got a city where some communities are involved and some communities aren't involved. That's just the way it is. We have to accept that as a fact. We can't force people to vote if they don't wish to vote on the elections, whether it be the neighborhood council, municipal, state, or federal elections. That's just the way, under democracy, that's the way it goes. My concern is the dollars we're spending, and when we have precious dollars that are shrinking, we need to establish priorities on what we're going to do. Not to say that clerk doesn't run good elections, right, because Mr. Krikorian and I are examples of good candidates and good elections. But the reality is, how much can we afford to do that?
Yeah, and I would just add, I guess, that it's not all about turnout. That's an important component of this move that we're making, but the other part of it is, and I think the other basis by which we can evaluate success is level of involvement and turnout, but also level of confidence in the results of the election and eliminating potential disputes and lack of credibility, which sometimes in some areas we've had as well. All right, any other comments that you have? All right, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And I'd like to ask, if I could, if you can just hold off on a minute, Madam Clerk. I'd like to ask any representatives from Bonk who are here to come up and provide comment.
Good morning. Daniel Gatika, Board of Neighborhood Commissioners. Just came by to mention some stuff that us as a board have kind of come across with some neighborhood councils. And actually some of the stuff has already been addressed. But another issue that's kind of an issue with the neighborhood councils is the requiring of IDs during elections. When before in the past there was no IDs required, now they are, and it's kind of an issue with some NCs who don't necessarily require an ID. Excuse me.
What's the purpose for the ID?
The city clerk is requiring it as a proof of residence
That they live in that particular. Against the bylaws of Sun Valley area neighborhood. That they live in that particular district.
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
The other issues, this location bias. I believe that there's an issue with having polling places at places, for example, if a teacher's running for a seat and their particular school is a polling place, that's also been an issue with some NCs. As it is, they have very limited spaces to run their elections. And really that's, I mean, other than those two things, everything's been addressed so far. You know, we are concerned about the Westwood NC and making sure that the city clerks can hopefully run that election. If not, I mean, like I said, we gave some parameters last night on what to do if they can't. But other than that, those are really the main topics that we've kind of come across.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your service. Madam Clerk, it seemed like you wanted to add a couple of points, and if you could, as you do, also if you could respond to the issue about IDs.
I would defer to Arlene to address that question on the IDs and also about...
Come on up to the microphone, please.
And also about the school polling place. We have resolved that. My point in listening to the committee talk about how important outreach is, we have a suggestion. If there are neighborhood councils that have additional funds that they wanted to buy, purchase, say, an additional polling place, or purchase additional vote by mail, or wanted to run a pilot electronic, like computer voting system, our position is that it's too late in the game to implement these things, but if neighborhood councils have money that they can contribute, we would suggest that they put that into outreach, because that's absolutely the key to the game, is if additional dollars could be used to supplement Dunn's efforts in the outreach area, because it's a win-win situation if it's a large turnout, and we absolutely would support something like that. And it's just an idea that I'm floating out there.
Okay. In terms of what we sometimes term the biased polling places, the concern that we had was based on the experience we had in 2008, where we had a location where access was perceived to be limited and may have been limited to one side of a contentious neighborhood council election versus the other. And so our plan was to try to locate the polling place in neutral territory where one side wouldn't clearly wouldn't benefit by the location. However, what we found as we recruited and in discussions following the recruitment was that, you know, that's a difficult thing to do. And it's even more difficult to do without like insulting people, because they felt like, well, you know, we're not going to have a problem at this polling place. We're not going to have the same issues that other neighborhood council did, and we understand that. So our stance is we are not rejecting a polling place because of a perceived bias. We will only reject a polling place in the future if there is a problem that we've experienced when we conducted an election at that location. So that was something we've just worked through recently. In terms of ID, if a neighborhood council's bylaws do not require ID, we are not requiring it of stakeholders. We are, however, requiring it of candidates who we feel should be held to a higher standard, and we want to verify that they do indeed meet the requirements for that office. So if it's a resident office, then we're verifying that they do indeed live in that area. If it's a business office, then we are verifying that they are indeed a business owner or work in that area. So we won't be requiring that of the stakeholders who come in to vote, if that's what the NC's bylaws say.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. I have two cards that have been submitted. They're both identified as being for general comments, but I'm assuming that they relate to this agenda item. Is that right? Okay. Why don't we start with Ms. Price, Judy Price.
Good morning. I'm I've actually had a lot of experience in terms of the election procedures, having been an immediate past president of the Greater Valley Glen Council. I did 2 elections through Dunn, and then the last city clerk election, because we were one of the unfortunate 22, because it was sort of rammed through, if you'll remember, Councilmember Zine, it was in December of 2007. I'd already done the election procedures for 2008 because the deadlines set forth by Dunn, which were fair, indicated that I had to have them in by a certain date in December, so I had to do them, and then of course along came the city clerk elections. One of the problems I have is, and I'm not representing the Greater Valley Glen Council, although I did the election procedures for 2010. One of the problems that we've encountered is that they will not do our caucuses. Our caucuses, now I submitted and probably was the first one to submit election procedures in April because I had the previous experience. Our bylaws, we have 4 seats that are caucus seats. We did not hear from the city clerk until late October, that's over 6 months, that they won't handle our caucuses. Now we're sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place in terms of the caucus election. So we have to go back to square one, have a separate day of election. And actually, Dunn had done a tremendous job of helping to streamline the caucuses so they were an equitable election, that people couldn't have sort of 2 bites at the apple. But we do not have a mechanism now for the caucuses. That's 4 seats. We did not get the election procedures back, as I said, until late October. I think one of the things, too, and I think Councilmember Zine hit on this, the neighborhood councils are losing, some of their local flavor, because with the city clerk elections, and I think they've done a tremendous job. Make no mistake. Can I keep going, please, a little bit? Will you give me a little more time?
Let's give her some time.
There's only 2 of us.
Without objection.
There's only 2 of us here.
Without objection, another
okay.
30 seconds.
Okay, okay. One of the things that, and I think they've done a major job in terms of as many neighborhood councils as there are, but we've had to compromise our bylaws and change them because the city clerk insists in terms of write-in candidates. We didn't allow that before. There are things that we are losing in the standardizing of the election process. And quite frankly, I thought, as you pointed out, Mr. Zine, is that the neighborhoods were supposed to have more autonomy. And I think that taking it away from Dunn has compromised us a lot, because they did an incredible job in terms of working with the councils. The outreach is a problem. We're not going to, the city clerk during the elections was a plus in terms of getting those mailers from the city clerk, because it sort of added a legitimacy. But if they're not going to do that now, what are we really gaining? I think that has to be rethought. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Price. I'd like to next call upon Mike O'Gara. Mr. O'Gara. And since we gave Ms. Price 3 minutes, Mr. O'Gara, you can have 3 minutes as well.
Have an hour's worth of time.
Squeeze it into 3.
The factual basis thing came about, I'm pretty sure, from Sun Valley. The biased location thing came about from Sun Valley, because we gave plenty of input to the city clerk. They ignored all of it. They sent us a piece of paper and said, where do you want your polling place? We filled out 5 schools. They put us into a park. I complained because the school, we've always had our elections there, plenty of parking. It's very, very convenient for everybody. It's great. So they said no, and then finally we agreed if we paid for it, they would do it. Well, they haven't let me know yet that they're going to do it. But then they found out one of my board members is a teacher at the school, and they said it's a biased location. They coerced her into signing a letter that says she won't run for office. It means that I cannot get anybody from Poly High School to run for office in my neighborhood council because it's a biased location. But the first park they picked out for us, my secretary from our neighborhood council works there. It wasn't a biased location when they picked it out. Okay, that's one of my complaints. We affirm that you are what you are. So when you're running for office, you come in and you put in what you're running for. We have 3 categories: residential, business, property owner, and at large. They didn't even put at large on the filing form for us. They issued a 16-page filing form, which is so convoluted you wouldn't know what the hell you were doing with it, okay? They've trampled all over our bylaws. we have 70% Hispanic people. A lot of those people don't have a lot of documents and ID. We have 5 people on our board who don't speak English. We get along fine. We've never had a challenge. At the bottom of this thing, it says, I certify under perjury that everything I've done is said is true. We're spending $8,000 to $10,000 on outreach, and this is the document that we sent out always in the past. And I've altered it, put their filing form in here. It's a 4-page document. We've already mailed it. It went out very late because they would not give me any information until the 28th day of December, which was the first day to file. So I couldn't even get this out to the residents until the 6th day of January. And the filing date is up next Tuesday to have your name on the ballot. So what I'm asking from you is that we're lost. I'm asking you to let us extend our ability to have stakeholders get on the ballot for another month, which is their write-in candidate period, so that we can get more word out and get some more people. But I recommend that Section F is done, Section A is done, we're Section B, we're screwed, and then you stop the city clerk from doing this. They have bullied the hell out of us. Thank you very much.
Have you found that it's gotten, how long have you been with neighborhood councils?
Almost 5 years.
Have you found it's gotten away from the original concept?
The election?
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The reason that it was appealing to so many people was the city clerk was going to do all this outreach, and the city clerk's name was going to be over all this stuff, and we were getting legitimacy. We got none of that. And the outreach that was done by Section B and by Section A, that Dunn's taking credit for, that was done between the neighborhood councils together. So, I mean...
Thank you. Appreciate
Would you like to see the 16 pages of their stuff and the notes I've made? It's awful.
I know they cut down a lot of trees.
But they didn't say anything. They confused the hell out of the people. And our stuff goes out in Spanish and English, because we have to.
Is theirs?
No, not one word in Spanish. Nothing.
Thank you.
They don't tell you where to mail it on the filing form or any of that stuff.
Mr. Zine, what's your pleasure?
Well, I'm frustrated, as many of the neighborhood council folks are, with the process that we have. We're not doing this in multiple languages?
Oh, on the point of multiple languages,
I mean, if they have neighborhood council representatives who
Yes,
are
we do provide
Spanish-
documents in multiple languages upon the NC Board's approved request.
How
So
come when theirs was done, it wasn't done that way?
They have not requested that.
They haven't requested it?
No.
Are you with the clerk's office?
Yes, sir. My name is Isaias Cantu. I'm the Senior Project Coordinator for the NC Election Unit.
I just think, and I'll go back to what I originally stated, $1.9 million is a tremendous amount of money to put forward to try and bring more people, more participation. I don't think we're getting our bang for our buck for a variety of reasons. So I don't know if the agenda item that we have before us, Mr. Chair, calls for us to take action on this. Reports relative to the elections and additional recommendations. I don't know if it's a vote or if it's a receive and file. What our direction is on this, but I don't want to criticize the city clerk's office. I just think that it's gotten so far away from the original concept of neighborhood councils and the cost incurred, though I really find we're getting our bang for our buck and we don't have the money anymore. So, Mr. Chair, are we voting on this, or is it receive and file?
Peter King, City Attorney's Office. Yes, there are. You're going to vote to approve the report and the additional recommendations, because the City Attorney's Office in these recommendations has to prepare some ordinances to implement some of the additional changes that they've recommended in the report. So that's what you'd be doing.
Well, it's a lengthy report.
Sir, all we're asking for today is that you will instruct the city attorney to prepare an ordinance that will establish a recount fee schedule and a neighborhood council election challenge process, because our elections are coming up in March. The ordinance needs to be in place 30 days, as all ordinances do. Without this, we will have no recount option and no challenge option come March. And if individuals wish to have a recount or make a challenge, they will not have that ability.
So that's what we're going. That's what we're
Precisely, sir.
Did we have that with Dunn? Was that the same process with Dunn? A recount and a challenge when Dunn ran the elections? Didn't have it. Was there ever a problem with it?
Sorry.
Oh, here comes the city attorney. Watch out. Mr.
Let me
King,
just
what's
clarify.
happening?
Yeah. Gwen Poindexter with the City Attorney's Office in the Neighborhood Council Advice Division. Prior to the city clerks handling the elections, the election process was held by the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, as you're aware. And the City Council had also adopted some election procedures by resolution. And in that document, those election procedures provided for a challenge process that originally contemplated a resolution by what was called a final decision maker. So there was a process. The final decision makers could have been entities that the neighborhood council chose, which could have been an individual. Many of them used the Human Relations Commission. But the final decision maker process was actually final, which is why we use that term, upon the decision by that decision maker.
Was there any cost incurred by the challengers?
By the challengers?
There were challenges?
No, to make a challenge, you just filed a request with the department, and then they transferred that document to the decision maker. It was an administrative challenge process.
Well, the problem I have is an individual from the community who's doing this out of the goodness of their heart for the community benefit, and they want to challenge something that's going to cost them money.
No. There's two separate processes.
The recount's going to cost them money.
The recount is the only aspect of the challenge that will cost. Any other challenge, you're challenging it because of the list of reasons that are stated in the report, would not be a fee. It's the recount fee. The city clerk can speak to this, but the recount causes administrative costs on the part of the city clerk. They need to physically do that.
How much are we talking about?
It's based on the same formula as for municipal elections, and $798.
$798? I can't support us charging neighborhood council folks who want to challenge something a fee, and they're not getting paid anything. It seems ridiculous to charge them a fee when they're doing this out of the goodness of their heart. They're not getting any compensation. They don't get paid a stipend. They don't get anything. They get money to do things for the community, so someone's going to take $798 out of their pocket for the fee to challenge. I just can't accept that. I think we need to have a process. If they want to challenge, they can challenge to the system and not charge them.
The city clerk's office, Darrell Powell, CLA's office, the city clerk's office may want to address the fact if the ballot recount is done manually, it says in your report is $2.28.
Per ballot.
Per ballot.
After a flat fee.
Okay.
After an initial flat fee. And how was that initial flat fee determined? Because
It's based on the same formula as for municipal, but easy.
Anyway, I just can't see charging these folks money to do something when they're doing something that they think is going to benefit the community. I mean, they're paying taxes. Now we're going to get more money out of them. I can't support that part of it. I can support the aspect that you want to do what was the first part?
Challenge, the challenge procedure.
That's not going to charge it. That's not going to cost them any money.
No.
it creates a framework by which you assess challenges and defines what the appropriate bases for a challenge would be and would not be. Is that right?
Some of the, reasons would be alleged electioneering, for instance, or other things. However, as was pointed out, the recount could be a subset of that challenge. A challenge could eventually go into a request for recount. That is not unforeseeable.
Okay. Well, I'd like to go ahead then, if we could, and move forward on the clerk's recommendations regarding a structure for the challenge with a few caveats. And my caveats would be as follows. First, I'd request that the clerk make clear that it is permissible for neighborhood council poll workers to work within their own precinct or neighborhood council, subject to final placement by the city clerk based on distribution of workload needs, as you described earlier. And with a further caveat that challenges to the poll worker working in their own precinct on the basis of bias would not be considered a challengeable grievance within this structure. Further, as a part of that, I'd ask that we receive and file the report's recommendations to allow the city clerk to conduct neighborhood council board elections during the months of March, April, May, and June of each even-numbered year. The council has already adopted a motion approving that the elections take place during that time period, so I think that is a moot issue at this point. There was also a discussion about, and this goes to the issue of challenges as well, because it defines who is eligible to be a candidate. There was a discussion about the propriety of clarifying whether a neighborhood council can apply term limits. My view of the state of the law right now is that there's silence on the issue, which in my view allows the neighborhood councils to decide for themselves whether or not they wish to include term limits within their bylaws in defining who a stakeholder is who's eligible to run. I know there's a difference of views on that, so I'd like the city attorney, first of all, to comment on that, and then I'm going to comment further.
All right, thank you, Councilman. I'll make that comment. The Neighborhood Council Review Commission was charged to evaluate the entire system of neighborhood councils, and in part of that evaluation, they recommended recommendation 57, which says that term limits shall be eliminated. Prior to the current changes in the plan, the City Council had expressed a desire to impose term limitations on neighborhood councils, and the original plan said that no board member may serve in a board term more than 8 consecutive years, which is how the term limits became discussed within the neighborhood council world. When the City Council was considering the various Neighborhood Council Review Commission recommendations, it specifically took up recommendation number 57, while it was also discussing the concept of neighborhood council elections being held every 2 years. And so the City Council, in fact, adopted and approved the recommendation that there shall be no term limitations, affirmed the fact that neighborhood council board member terms of office will be 2 years or 4 years, so that neighborhood councils can now decide within the current election cycle whether they want their board members to serve 2-year terms or 4-year terms. And when the City Council adopted that language, it also deleted the previous language in the plan that says there shall be no term limits by the language that restricted the number of years a neighborhood council a board member could serve. Right. So my legal opinion is, and I believe that council took that step, was to eliminate term limitations upon neighborhood councils, and I think that included the term limitations imposed by the plan, as well as the ability of the neighborhood council to limit themselves by their own bylaw amendments.
Yes. Or one could also interpret that as suggesting that the City Council no longer wished to weigh in on that issue and therefore leave it to the neighborhood councils. But in any event, I can see where there's ambiguity by that action. So I would suggest that as part of this ordinance as well, this recommendation that we ask the city attorney to clarify in the proposed ordinance, which will allow the council then to vote on the term limits issue. And my recommendation would be that we make clear that each neighborhood council can decide for themselves whether or not to impose a term limit on the number of terms that a member can serve. And with that, I would then move that we approve the implementation of the Neighborhood Council Election Challenge process with those recommendations and caveats.
So that I understand correctly, then you are not moving forward the recount fee to council?
We're gonna do that separately.
I see.
So,
Thank you.
so that was the first motion. Mr. Zine has seconded without objection. That will be the recommendation of this committee. Now, the next issue is the Neighborhood Council election recount fee schedule. And the proposal was to impose a recount schedule. The manual recount fee for any neighborhood council board member election conducted by the City of Los Angeles shall be $798.80 for one neighborhood council and $2.28 for each ballot recounted manually. That is the recommendation of the clerk. Mr. Zine does not support that.
It is possible to do no recommendation.
Yeah, why don't we do that? Why don't we go ahead and move that forward then without recommendation of this committee? Council can consider that as well. And then finally, although this is not one of the recommendations in the report, it's clear that there's still much to be worked out about this process. And I think it's going to be important for the council to consider all of the comments that have been raised today about whether we took the right course in the first place in moving towards this format for elections. And I hope that we'll have a discussion about that in council when this moves forward. If we do, if we end up proceeding as it appears that we do, I would like to move that we instruct the clerk to report back to this committee after the elections to determine potential improvements, potential problems that we can improve on, your findings regarding the results of the elections, including changes in turnout and changes in the number of challenges. I'd further ask that the clerk report to council on Friday whether including the Westwood Neighborhood Council in the upcoming elections would be feasible. And you know what? I'm sorry. Let's save that for our next committee. If you could report back in greater detail on that and the complexities that may cause, whatever your findings are, if you could report that back at the next committee meeting. And then along with that report, I'd like you to include suggestions as to what can be done over the course of the coming months for new councils that may be certified as well. Okay. And if there's nothing further and no further public comment, I think that will be our action, and we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great meeting.
Thank you very much.
Great meeting. You actually used some of my, very interesting.